Hello, for this tutorial I'm going to be running through the build process for the Agile Deployment Toolkit with an example configuration. The first thing you need to have available if you want to complete a successful build is your access credentials for the various services that the build kit requires. So you can see here, in my case I've got a DigitalOcean personal access token, Cloudflare access token, DigitalOcean Spaces keys and Amazon SES access keys. Obviously these are temporary credentials and I shall delete them once this tutorial has been once I've completed recording this tutorial. So as you can see, I'm SSH'd onto the build server that we deployed in the previous tutorial. You can see the build server running here on the DigitalOcean cloud, and that's the machine that this process will be taking place on. So let's see what we've got available here. So we see the build kit that we cloned onto this machine in the previous tutorial. So to run the build process we need to run this file here through the shell, and so we copy it and paste it like that, and that runs the build process. So we get some status messages here which you can read through in your own time, and then for the database and SSH ports I'm just going to accept the defaults, but you can change those as you desire. I'm in Europe and London. The build identifier is going to be NewOcean because that's the name of my application. The servers can be run on Ubuntu or Debian VPS systems, so we're going to use Ubuntu 20.04, and in this case it's going to be running on the DigitalOcean cloud, so I could configure things to use a different service provider, but in this case I'm going to use DigitalOcean. So it's now asking for my access token, which I can find here, so I just copy that and paste it into the build process, and it tells me that that token is validated correctly, and so it's live and usable. So let's continue. There's nothing wrong there. So we don't want to use snapshots on this occasion. This is going to be a Virgin WordPress install, so we want to choose option 0 there. Obviously WordPress needs PHP, so let's install PHP and version 7.4, and I want to just use the default values that the script set for the PHP configuration, but if I want to change some of them I can change them here. Display name is going to be NewOcean, and the website URL ok1.newocean.org.uk. So the web server I want to use in this case is going to be Nginx, but I could use Apache or Lite, so Nginx is option 1. The DNS service provider is going to be Cloudflare, and obviously Cloudflare provides quite an extensive set of security services, so most likely you're going to want to choose Cloudflare for that option. So that's my Cloudflare email address entered, and now I need to use the Cloudflare API key, which I have here. Now for SSL certificate provisioning I'm going to use the automatic approach, and that means using the Let's Encrypt provider. Once the web server is built I'll be prompted to run a command which will provision the SSL certificate for me as part of the build process. Don't need Google Maps API keys, so we can not ignore that. Just your Git username and email address. And then the application source code is going to be stored in Bitbucket on this occasion. It's just my choice to use the Bitbucket, so I'll choose option 1, and then I enter the owner of the application, which is Agile Deployer, and the username is also Agile Deployer, and then I enter the password for my Bitbucket account. So I just put Y to confirm there, and the Agile Deployment Toolkit is stored in GitHub, so I need to choose GitHub here, and the username is Agile-Deployer in both cases, and there's no password on the account, so just enter there. So we don't want to use caching. That's an option which you can use under AWS with things like Elasticache and so on, if you want to have that for your application. So we don't want that. We do want to install a database, yes, and we'll choose a single instance database rather than databases as a service. So managed databases can be installed through options 2 and 3. We're just going to choose a single database instance which we look after ourselves. So option 1, MariaDB. And then the region is London 1. The machine size is going to be 1 GB for each machine. You can choose any of the sizes that you require there. And we just want a single web server as our base configuration. So with scaling we can add web servers by altering configuration settings at runtime once it's deployed. But for our base system here we just want 1. I'm just going to put no here, which is that your media assets can be stored in the cloud, and we simply keep them on our local file systems because this is just a tutorial with not many assets to it. So now we need to use DigitalOcean spaces for our S3 service, S3 style service, and we can see I just want to use the Amsterdam spaces endpoint. So you need to use the endpoint which is relevant to where you are. And then we can enter the access keys that we've got. So just to show you how that's done, so just enter the access key there, and again this is configuring a tool called S3 command, S3 CMD. So we have to set the default region to US. It doesn't work with the DigitalOcean spaces unless the region is set to US. I don't know why, but that's the default region, which must be. So then the S3 endpoint is going to be that one, so we can just re-enter it. And then we want %bucket s dot, and then that same endpoint that we've used previously, and then we can press return for those few options, and then we want to test with the supplied credentials, and it says success, your access key and secret key worked fine, save settings yes, and if for some reason it cycles through this again, so we just press enter keys all the way through. This only happens with some providers, it doesn't happen with all of them, but with DigitalOcean spaces it seems to need to be run twice. So we can test again, success, save settings, yes, and then it brings us out of the loop. So do you want to disable hourly backups? Well, we can, yes. I mean, if you have hourly backups, it means you're getting a backup of your source code every hour, basically, to your repository. Super safe backups mean that you have a copy of your source code backed up to the S3 service that you're using, as well as your source code repository. So in most cases you're going to want to have super safe backup switched on. Now this is going to be a development deployment, so production deployments include scaling services and so on, but development deployments is just a single web server and a single database, which is not a resilient architecture, but it's good enough for development scenarios. So we choose option 1. Now you want Virgin, and we're going to choose WordPress, which is option 2. So now we need to enter an email address where we want system messages to be sent. So this is your administrator email address, where you want status messages about the operation of the infrastructure to be sent to. So then I'm going to use Amazon SES as my email service provider, and I'll just send them from the same email address. This is system messages, by the way, and this service would also be used by WordPress for application level messages as well. So your configuration settings here will be used by the WordPress application as the email service provider. You need to obviously configure your application to be able to use them. So the email address or username for your SMTP provider, so that's Amazon SES. So let's just copy the username and paste it in here, and then similarly with the password. Oh, didn't copy for some reason. It's not letting me paste it. Right. Okay. So now we can just initiate the build process. This will take a few minutes, and I'll pause the video now and get back to you once the main or midway through the build process to show you the next step. So we're midway through the build process at the moment. You can see the web server output there, status messages for the build, and then you can see there's some very clear instructions here about what needs to be done to provision the SSL certificate for this deployment. So we need to copy this command here, having followed the instructions here, and opened up a new terminal window over here on our build machine. Then we just paste that command into there, let it run, and it will provision an SSL certificate for us automatically. So you can see server responded with a certificate. That's what you want to see there. So we can go back to our main build window. Make sure you don't exit out of this window, because all you want to do in this one is press the enter key, which will then continue with the build process. The next thing to be provisioned will be the database server. So I'll pause the video again and get back to you once that's completed as well. The build process is now completed. You can see all the status messages there. And so in a few tens of minutes we've gone from nothing to a fully deployed WordPress installation, which you can see running here as the ok1.newocean.org.uk WordPress install. So let's just complete the installation. So we called it NewOcean. This is only a temporary, I'll delete this after the tutorial is finished. So let's just put a weak password, confirm weak password, use test. And install WordPress. And there we have our WordPress install running on the DigitalOcean cloud, which you can see the machines as the web server and database. Which should display in a minute here. So there's the database and the web server that we're running on. So the next step would be to build out your application within WordPress, and then if you look on the GitHub directory, you'll find some documentation within the Agile Deployment Toolkit. So it's under the doco directory, and then you've got deployment and development. So under deployment there's various different things that you can use to get yourself going. You need to check out probably auto scaling configuration for how to implement scaling when you deploy with a production build. And under development there's various options as well. So the next thing you'd want to do is to like I say, build out your application, and then you probably want to review creating an application baseline, because that tells you how to baseline your application for repeated deployments. So there's a good bit to get your teeth into there. So I'll just leave it as that for now. Thanks for listening.